So thank you so much for coming on today, Sophia. It's really interesting to get
Thank you
people
very much.
from no, thank you. It's really interesting to get people from different backgrounds on the podcast. As I'm from industrial design background, but I always enjoy talking to other designers. And on the podcast, I'm looking to branch out a bit. And we've had automotive designers on. Now we're having architect on. Who knows? Like, because the way I see it, like design is a language, and if you're any sort of designer, you can speak the same language because you come from the same, theology, really. Um, so yeah, so I thought I'd get you on. I was recommended by Sorab. Are you familiar with him?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, we connected through another mutual connection, and Sarab is a great car designer with a lot of great experience. And I've never talked to car designers. It was something that I just found through LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
I thought it was really interesting to talk to him because of, again, like you said, design is a language, and I was interested in like what what points of connection can we find.
Hmm.
He was writing an article or talking to somebody who was writing an article about how air taxis might impact our future cities and the
Okay.
way that we think through architecture. And so he and I kind of had just a conversation between the two of us, and we're talking about, what is an air taxi? How does that impact the verticality of a city? How does that
Hmm.
impact the horizontality of what we understand as a street or urbanism? And I kind of started thinking about, everything that has to do with a building, the entryway, right? Where's the entrance? Um, where's the top? Where's the
Hmm.
bottom? Where's the middle? All of a sudden, at that point, everything that we understood as proportion is going to be kind of flipped. And what does that mean in terms of how big the streets are? Does the size of the building itself need to change? And so we kind of had this really interesting conversation going back and forth. And then he asked Midjourney for some examples, and he's
Hmm.
been riffing on the visualization of these ideas, and it's been really fascinating what he's been coming up with, and he's been
Hmm.
posting on that, and kind of
Yeah.
we've been we keep going back and forth, so same exact kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then he recommended that I talk to you because I'm similar to you. I want to talk to other people outside of the
Hmm.
architectural field. There's a lot that we can learn from each other. And, maybe we work on different scales and maybe we don't actually, because
Hmm.
architects go to small scales and industrial designers go to large ones. So I think there's a lot of interesting conversations to be had that sometimes we're missing because we're sort
Hmm.
of in our own worlds.
Yeah, definitely. I think there can sometimes be a bit of a rift between disciplines, but there really shouldn't be because
Yes,
like there's no reason to have a rift. Like we're taught basically a foundation of the same degree anyway, just with different adaptations. And yeah, like we're all in the same mission, really. Uh,
yeah, I mean it's hard, it's hard, like you have your daily life and you have your projects, and you're if you're working on a specific type, you're probably the only designer on it sometimes, most of the time. And there's only one designer on a project or two,
mm,
and so you don't necessarily have the opportunity to cooperate or collaborate with somebody else, and you really have to make a concerted effort to do that.
mm,
And so as designers, we're typically putting out fires and doing the 59th iteration of something.
yeah,
And the last thing we think of is going, you know, across the way or across the street and talking to somebody who designs kettles. Like it's
yeah,
it's not a it's not an immediate thought that you have. So,
yeah. No, definitely. Well, yeah, maybe
but
just
good
to
on
start.
you for doing this podcast because
Yeah,
that's
thank you.
exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually thinking of changing the name because I think Let's Talk ID is too like focused, but maybe just
Mhm.
even Let's Talk Design because I feel like, that's what we're doing. We're just talking design.
That's
But yeah,
right.
it's simple. But yeah, maybe just to
Cool.
start off, would you like to talk to your background as an architect and what kind of experiences and projects were really pivotal to bring you to where you are today?
Um, I think for me, it's really a big, I think it's the range of work that I've been able to tackle, whether it's through university, in the beginning, you start drawing with pencil, right? You
Mm,
is and you learn the language of design and drawing, right? You
mm,
learn the language of drawing and communication, and everything from there to technology today and how we're using that to collaborate with others. I think everything in between is from, a small scale of designing a bench under a stair to like the massing of a giant addition, to a university building.
Mm,
So I've kind of seen and experienced both of that, and there's considerations. So I think that's where the conceptual value of
mm,
an idea is the most important thing. And one thing that I learned in school is that conceptual concepts is, something that we have to go hard after and be uh, an honor, and then in the real world, you end up really digressing from them.
mm,
And so there's sort of like this constant tension between trying to create something that's both practical and beautiful, but also unique in some way, that has a signature, that has a specific symbolism to it, for lack of a better word.
mm,
And because architects don't like to use symbolism, or designers. But I would say that for me, the most pivotal things that I've worked on was probably, I was working pretty seriously involved in a new music building for
mm,
Haverford College in Pennsylvania. And that was a renovation addition project that I did in my last firm at William Rawn Associates. They kind of gave me the project as a, you know, throw you in the cold water, do it from start to finish,
mm,
drawings, everything, coordination. It's a complicated little building, but it's interesting. And I think for me, design lives in every single part of the building.
mm,
And it's not just about, the things that you see.
mm,
You have to design around all of the other things you don't see.
mm,
The mechanical spaces, the penetrations in the concrete, the that needs to go between the slab and the piping and the ducts in order to isolate sound,
mm.
because architecture is not just about what you see, it's about what you hear and what you don't hear.
Yeah.
It's about what you touch and what you don't touch. And so there's sort of, it's a very uh, encompassing and complicated little world that you have to consider a lot of different things. And then within that, there's like a ton of decisions to make.
Mm,
And decisions are hard. They really are. And that's why some of us have a trouble making them intuitively. I find that some designers end up going through iterations just for the sake of it to make
mm,
sure that they've covered all the possible bases, but they miss an intuitive aspect of design sometimes. And I've noticed that. And there's something to be said about intuition for designers.
mm,
And that I don't quite know where that lives. I don't know quite how to tap into that but I've certainly seen us waste a lot of time.
mm,
And I don't know that that's necessary. I'm not sure. I mean, I've certainly done projects in school that I wish I would have worked on more because I just was so committed to one idea that I wanted to see it through. And I wish I'd pushed myself more out of those bounds, out of those limits.
yeah.
Um, so there's no golden ratio to any of this. But it's always good to talk to others and get
Mm,
other opinions and get other input, because you can't do any of this in a silo. That idea of like the architect, the Howard Roark or whatever of the world.
mm,
I mean, there are architects like that. They exist. We see them on big billboards, architectural billboards and whatnot. But those guys are, sitting in a room and they're being brought options constantly
mm,
by people who work for them. And they go through them and they think through them and they have many, many conversations. And in the end, a decision is made. And those decisions and those choices is really where the design lives.
mm,
That's hard to do, actually, to make a decision
mm,
and to solve a problem a certain kind of way.
mm. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Like I feel like yeah, the classic view of a designer in history is maybe like a man or woman like just sitting in a room isolated, with their pen and paper. But like a lot of the time it's not really like that. And like the best design is definitely done collaboratively. When like you have different people from different backgrounds, all collaborating on one idea and like really bringing all their different perspectives to the point because like you're just going to be disadvantaged if you've only got one person doing like coming up with ideas, because the human brain is limited to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's like this thing to be said about collaboration in a space that is collaboration can also get away from you really quickly,
Mm,
because too many hands in the pot is also not necessarily
mm.
productive.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think of design, and I've been saying this like nonstop. I say this like at least once a week to somebody, uh, because I heard it, not too long ago, and I think this is so true. Architects, and I think not just architects, designers in general, are basically trained to solve problems they've never solved before.
Mm,
And that's literally our job, is to solve problems we've never solved before. And that's like true of many other jobs, but um, the the variety with which we have the variety of tools and options with which we can work with is a lot more, you know, intangible. It's broader, right?
mm,
And it's getting broader now with technology and possible all kinds of possibilities and AI and all of that.
mm,
So we kind of are constantly in the space where like there's so many possibilities that we have to sort of find constraints within our design process, find the useful constraints and the ones that need to break.
mm,
Because, a client comes to you with a program, and that program is not necessarily always set in stone. There's some design aspect to that program.
mm,
There's some aspect to how that program might evolve over time once you set plans, once you set views, once you set, orientation. And
mm,
then from then on, you keep going. And you need exit safety, you need, materiality on the building. And all of these things become both decisions and constraints in some way. So you're
mm.
constantly working with that are building off of one another or conflicting with one another. And there is a kind of like interesting dance that goes on throughout design. And that's why we're never really finished.
Mm.
That's why architects and designers are, in school, there's always this like, I'm not really finished, but I gotta like put my pencils down and I gotta finish the plan and I gotta like do the rendering, but it's not finished. And that frustration is useful, um, until it drives you nuts. But it's useful because it's kind of like it you come into a space where you're really just in exploration,
Mm.
and you have to give yourself the latitude to explore and think beyond the limits of whatever the project is.
I think as well, like having the need to constantly make things better is what's leading us towards innovation as designers. Like if we didn't have that
Yeah.
need, we probably wouldn't innovate to the level that, like, not even just as designers, like as humans, like
Hmm.
that need for constantly making things better is what has led us to where we are today, where we have innovated to the point of like mass civilization, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that design plays a huge role in that. I mean, everything is design.
Mm,
Engineering is design. And,
mm,
like we're talking about the visual, visual tactile kind of like everyday objects, maybe cars, whatever, but there's a lot of design that goes behind that in
mm,
engineering. And the, working with engineers that understand how designers work
mm,
is really vital,
mm,
because because they need to be understanding of our sort of like constant changing, right?
mm.
There's constant evolution to everything that we do, and it drives most people crazy. but the people those engineers and those collaborators who are interested in that and are interested in solving those unique problems,
Mm,
that becomes a very wonderful collaborative space.
mm,
um, but I think what you're talking about in innovation is that, designers just by in general, they want to do something different. They want
mm,
to do something new. They have their own ideas and they want to see how to make it possible.
mm.
So I think that's just by nature how designers are. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's a given, but yeah, I think if you work to that strength that you always want to, do better, and like every project you do is better than the previous one, I feel like you get to a point of yeah, just better and better work. Whereas if you kind of feel like you just want to keep doing the same good work, I feel like it's hard to definitely progress to some degree. Yeah. Like sometimes, like for example, I find like I criticize my own work, but then I think like my work like 1 year ago was worse. Like that's like a good way to think about it, really. Like every year is just an improvement. Like, you know, and like maybe one day I'll get to a
That's a
point where I won't criticize my work as much, and I'll actually be proud of it. Like that's kind of like the aspiration I work towards. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish that for you, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
Yeah. Uh, that's funny. Maybe just
You
moving on
have to
to
you have to keep questioning yourself. You
yeah.
can't not do that because then you do start just kind of producing the same thing over and over again. But I also found this interesting that when I was in school, somebody said that art designers are sort of like they have a project in their mind that they're like obsessed with, and they just keep trying to find the answer to that project. And it's in every project they're like seeing that conflict and they're trying to resolve it. And it's very true because some of the students in at the GSD where I was in an undergrad, their projects were very similar each time, and they were just as enthusiastic about it because they were like so obsessed with a particular problem.
Yeah.
um, and I think that there's about that, like there's so many ways to solve it and you're trying to find the right one,
Mm,
but there's going to be there's no perfection. I
mm.
mean, maybe you figured it out, but I don't know. Outside of that, um, it's hard to sort of think of yourself as somebody who's going to get it right one
Yeah.
day.
And that's not necessarily what it's about as well. And it's not about getting it right. It's about doing a good job and getting something that is a good result out of it. It doesn't have to necessarily be the right result, like because right is subjective, I suppose, at that point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if everybody had the same constraints, it's amazing. If as long as everybody has the same constraints, the outcomes are still different.
Mm,
But if you solve the main problems of the project or of the prompt, then isn't that what's really wonderful, that we don't get to the same result,
mm. Yeah.
right? The same outcome. We may solve the same problems, but we do it differently. That's what's wonderful about it. Thank God that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One interesting topic I wanted to talk about was, the way the world's been going, like architecture seems to constantly be developing and developing. And especially like as you mentioned, like autonomous vehicles, like there's so many big technological advancements that are probably going to happen in the next like 5 to 10 years that could
Hmm.
reshape what is architecture and what is like even a city, what is a house, right? And I think back to this project I did in my first year of uni, where we basically designed like a modular home using hexagons, like to think about like a way to
Hmm.
make a house that isn't a box kind of thing.
Hmm.
We made like hexagon modular homes that we could like connect together, and it was meant to be like a Mars kind of house, thinking about what the future of living on Mars would be like, right? And like I think about something like that, like, you know, we're so used to living in boxes. Like that's just something we're so used to now. But like, do you think we could have, as the needs of the world change, do you think we could have massive changes in what is the norm?
Of course. I mean, of course. And we're already seeing that. And I mean, like pioneers like Zaha Hadid, who rest in peace. She was, her and Schumacher were absolute pioneers in their work. And when you say boxes, like the first thing I think of course, is straight lines and orthogonal, relationships, like
Hmm.
literally a box. I mean, you can do all kinds of things with straight lines that are not just a box. But in terms of like technology that's evolving, I think that's really releasing designers from their limits.
Hmm.
And it's not just their limits, right? Like limits of budget, limits of scale, limits of availability. Like we can't do crazy curvilinear walls for every project because it costs money and it's hard and not everyone can do it. And
Mm.
somebody in New York is manufacturing, is doing, you know, 3-axis, 4-axis, six-axis CNC stuff, but that costs so much money. I mean, like, look at what Jeannie Gang just the shotcrete and how that's becoming more accessible, right, to designers. And I think once we have access to different technology and when we start to understand it, that's when we are given more latitude. But again, it comes down to constraints. Like, can we build more buildings with less corners, but more, curves? Yeah. I mean, of course we can, but the technology is limiting us at the moment, right? Like, there's only so many places that can do curved glass. There's only so many places that can manufacture that, and as technology is becoming more accessible and more easily adaptable, that stuff is becoming easier to do
Mm.
overall.
Yeah. I suppose it comes down to as well, like, our whole system is built around like a specific way to make a building. So obviously like that, like making a building that way is going to be the most cost effective way. But like doing anything
Yes.
out of the norm doesn't necessarily fit within the current system. But like if there was a different way to make a building that was the norm, it would be cheaper. But it's just because like, economies of scale, like it doesn't line up. Um
No, I mean but it has to be so specific. And I'm sorry to interrupt, but like, we're 3D printing buildings.
yeah,
Like, it's being done right now.
yeah.
And that's makes sense in some context. And in some context it doesn't. Like,
Mm.
yes, in where I am in Boston, it's steel and concrete and for a certain size building. That makes total sense. Like, okay, steel's expensive, but where else are you going to do it? Okay, we're starting timber building construction on a much larger scale now, and that's really exciting, and CLT, and that's good. But again, those technologies need time to develop. They need time to be tested. They need time to make sure that they can withstand the test of life safety for the public, right? So that kind of stuff is time consuming, but it's happening quicker and quicker,
Mm. Yeah. No, it's exciting. I mean, the
I
prospect of
think.
3D printing your home one day could be really interesting. You know,
Yeah,
yeah, do up a rough
absolutely.
Revit floor plan, and then the 3D printer floors in and just prints your house in a matter of a day. Like that'd be pretty amazing.
We need to improve Revit first. And that's actually the other thing that's happening. Architects are starting to branch out into, adjacent fields. And I'm talking to a lot of people who are trying to improve software, who are trying to improve the way that we work.
Mm,
And part of the reason why the architectural profession suffers so much is because we are having a hard time marrying all of the tools together, getting a clear workflow, and also inputting all the tons and tons of variables that go into
mm,
something. Like, you know, you have to, like, if you want to download, a specific toilet for your house, of it, like, that toilet doesn't exist modeled,
mm,
but you want to make sure that its size is, appropriate for the space, and it's probably a tight space. So you want to make sure that their inches are just right. So what
mm.
do you do? You model. People do this, and it's a huge waste of time.
Yeah.
So there are people out there who are like, okay, can we not waste a ton of time, creating a material for this specific carpet? Can we just talk to the manufacturers and get their stuff imported and, work that in? So people are working on that. Plus, that helps the workflow through to the construction contractor side. If you can get the data in there and you can, harvest AI somehow to scrub the internet, get that stuff in Revit, and then have it talk directly to the cost estimator,
Mm,
you know, time saver. And I don't think AI is going to be useful to us in the design sense. Sure, it can help us generate some ideas, but it's very surface level right now
mm,
in terms of what we're doing image wise,
mm,
visualization wise. I think AI is going to be much more useful to us in terms of improving our processes. We've got to use it to that degree. And in that sense, I don't see it taking over the world. I think it's just going to help us be more efficient.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I think like even the concept of, are you familiar with like the AI point clouds?
No.
Basically, like it's a thing like NVIDIA created where it's like an AI that uses points to create an object. So you can like be like, I want a red toilet, and it will just like use a point cloud to create the structure of that toilet. Obviously, you can't
Mm-hmm.
manufacture it, but I feel like for an architectural use case, it could be really useful because like you could just quickly type up like, I don't know, like the dimensions of the toilet, and it will just create it for you. It doesn't need to be like 100% exactly the same. It just needs to be to scale.
Mm.
So I think like
Okay,
in
that's
ways like
interesting.
that, I never even thought about it. I was like, how would you use this in design? But like for your use case, I feel like it would actually make sense. Like a,
That's great.
yeah.
What is this? This is a website?
I
Like,
don't
what do
think it's
I,
like
how do I?
it's not like refined yet. It's very rough. But NVIDIA,
Okay.
look it up, NVIDIA Point Cloud. I'm pretty sure it's like it's open source, but it's very basic right now. Like you can't make anything too complicated. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like it's interesting in the future, like how things like that will really revolutionize fields. Because even in industrial design, I feel like it's kind of like that. Like you got so many different software packages. Like you can be anywhere from like a traditional SolidWorks designer to like a Rhino designer who uses Grasshopper to like a VR designer. Like so, like it's not very like interconnected necessarily, and like it's hard to be
Yes.
everything but also nothing. You know what I mean? But yeah,
Yes. Yes. Yep.
but yeah,
Yeah, and that there's, there's something to be said about this notion of like generalists, right? Everybody wants to be a generalist to some
mm,
degree, but you can't. Like,
mm,
there's too much out there.
yeah,
You either have to be really good at Revit or really good at CAD, really good at Grasshopper. You can be really good at all of those things, but it's unlikely that you are
yeah,
really good at all of them
yeah,
because really be on the forefront of what's happening. Every year Revit comes out with a new version, and you have to think about how all of the other stuff folds into it. Sure, I can go into Grasshopper and model something and import it into Revit. And of course, I work with AutoCAD and PDFs and images and all that stuff. But, you know, there has to be something that you use on a regular basis that you're familiar with and that you can speak to more specifically.
yeah,
And does it make sense for me to go and branch off and learn another piece of software? I don't know. Maybe it's better to work with someone who already knows how to do that.
mm,
And then strengthen our communication, design language, and process language in order to marry those two things together.
mm,
Ultimately, I think is going to be more and more collaborative because there's just too many specializations that
mm,
we're seeing right now.
mm. Yeah, it's very interesting because we have a very different industry in Australia. We have more of a generalist industry. We don't have
Mm-hmm.
necessarily as many specialized designers who specialize in like automotive design, for example, or like even like like specialize with a specific software package. They kind of just like everyone has to be a generalist because there isn't really the industry for it. Which
Mm-hmm.
makes it hard, but also interesting because you're constantly working with different mediums, different clients, different projects. But yeah, like maybe in the future we'll probably more move into the specialization, trend that's happened overseas already. And I suppose at that point, yeah, you'd
Yeah.
have to kind of decide what path you're going to go down. So, mm,
Yeah, I think it's here, it's very specific. And like once I started out my own firm, coming to me and saying, well, what kind of architecture do you do? And I'm
mm,
like, uh, to do, this is what I want to do, and this is what I'm doing.
mm,
And, all of those things are very different because um, I'm not going to get huge commissions right now. I have to work up to that point, and I have to do something in between. And the something in between is something I've not done before. So there are transferable skills, but in the end, like everybody keeps saying, you have to specialize, otherwise nobody's gonna see you seriously. And it's like, so when do I do that? Do I
mm,
specialize right this whatever project I'm working on, that's going to be the project that I work on forever? Or do I, you know, go after projects that I want, like it, it's a little bit less black and white once you actually start doing it. And but there's such a strong push here, particularly in the United States, with if you are going to do a project, how many of them have you done before? And your experience with them. And I think there's value in not doing projects that you've done before.
Yeah.
Because again, you bring something different to the table.
As we mentioned, if you keep doing the same thing over and over, you kind of just end up replicating the same thing. You're not really doing anything different. Yeah. Cut out for a
Are we
second.
back?
We're back.
We're back. Okay.
9:32.
Um,
We were going well.
I think that there is something about specialization that's also really valuable. I mean, like, right, and all of the systems that go into a hospital. You understand the fire protection, requirements. You understand the new requirements of the energy code. You understand the requirements of health and safety with the mechanical systems or whatever it is. Each project that you work on, the improvements, the incremental changes, you're able to catch on, right? So that's valuable. And you're able to solve problems on a much more incremental scale because you've noticed them much better than somebody who's not done it before. So I'm not saying that specialization is a bad thing at all. I think that those firms, for example, if it's a medium to large firm that hires people with different backgrounds and experiences, allow themselves to hear out or seek out different solutions to a problem. So realistically, I think it's good to have both. It's good to have people who understand project types and softwares and whatever, and those people who don't. But they need to work together in a way that's sort of like cross-pollination. And there's a lot of education in that. So there's a lot of communication and education and all of that, which, is a skill in and of itself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, you've come from an international background, right? You were born in Kazakhstan, right? In
Yes.
the end of the Soviet Union.
Yes, that's right.
It's funny because I have a friend actually who's from Kazakhstan, and he was
Oh, really?
offended when I was like, "What? Kazakhstan? Like the same place from the place from Borat?" And he was like, got like really offended and was like, "That's not even the same country." They what country is it? It's shot in Bulgaria or something, I think, Borat.
Yes, I think it's
Yeah.
Bulgaria, yeah, or Romania. I don't
Yeah.
remember which one, but yeah, it's not the same country. But he's representing Kazakhstan. So,
Yeah.
but you know what? I'm not offended. He put it on the map. A lot of people
Yeah,
didn't even
exactly.
know it was a
No
country
one would
before
even
him.
know
So
Kazakhstan. Yeah, it's so small, right? It's a tiny country. Yeah.
it's actually not. It's
Oh, really?
enormous.
Okay.
It's a really big country right under Russia.
True, Russia's insanely massive as well. But yeah, like you came from an international background. Do you think that that kind of cultural background has given you a different way of thinking, opposed to like because you're now a designer in America, which is a very different background to where you're from. Do you think that's given you a different cultural perspective towards your process?
I think it's given me a different language, like an understanding. Like whenever you speak another language, um, you can, there are words and meaning derive out of that language that doesn't exist in another language. So for sometimes, like if I'm angry, I'll speak in Russian, you know, because it just feels better. But to myself, I mean, or to somebody who understands.
Yeah.
But like same with design, I think there's a cultural aspect to how different countries design. And honestly, like I moved out of Kazakhstan when I was 8.
Yeah.
So I didn't really have much in the way of exposure to that. What I did have exposure to was when we moved to Canada when I was 8, 9, was really highly multicultural environment.
Mm.
And that was really important to me because I had friends from all over the world and people from all over the, you know, all over different regions, of kind of even just around me, in the local sense.
Mm.
And everybody spoke a different language. Everybody had, you know, family kind of all over the place. And we were all friends and shared ideas openly. In the design sense, you know, we were still fresh. We were in school in a Canadian context. So I don't know that I really had that kind of exposure to international.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think it's hard because it is important as a designer to kind of have that foundation. Like I suppose America is good because it's very there's so many different cultures living within America.
but every school has their own, you know, their own whatever philosophy that you're following. So whether you're applying to MIT or Harvard or Yale or whatever, or Northeastern,
Mm.
you're going after a certain type of idea, right? You're sort
Mm.
of going after a certain type of design approach and philosophy. So there's something to be said, and people that designers and architects that come from other parts of the world that give you that. When you go out to work, you know, you don't have that exposure, and
Mm.
you work international projects, and that's a whole other, you know, scenario.
Mm.
That just wasn't my case. I worked for a firm that did only US projects. So
Mm. Yeah. Maybe moving on from there, like a big thing at the moment in all design disciplines is sustainability. And
mhm,
I feel like with building with architecture in general, it can be very hard because a lot of the materials available aren't inherently sustainable, and it's the same with industrial.
mhm.
Like I've only recently started realizing just like how many components of a house is just not sustainable, and it's like kind of like mind blowing when you think about it. Like carpet, paint, it's all just plastic based things, and like and then you've got like wood that's covered in veneer and like staining that's just terrible in the environment as well. It's just like if you think about it, you'll just go down a rabbit hole and probably just not end up happy in the end. So like
Yes.
yeah, how do you balance that kind of need for more sustainability in your designs, while obviously knowing that it's not necessarily always possible?
Yeah, I mean, you have to work with what you have,
Mm.
but what's important is that the design community and the architecture community keeps pushing
Mm.
for products. The, you know, building owners understand that they want, you know, something that's more sustainable over time during the construction of the building. So where are we getting our materials from? Are they local? Are they not? You know, are we shipping in a bunch of different pieces from all over the world?
Mm.
Whether or not, you know, those materials are quote unquote sustainable, I think we're developing more vocabulary around it that's more useful, like, you know, carbon sink, you know, levels of carbon in any kind of product, or the life cycle analysis
Mm.
of a building, right? Are we building a building that's for 50 years? Or are we building one for 100 years? And how are we doing that? And
Mm.
what kind of materials are going into it? Like, you know, we're going to use the same types of insulation for
Mm.
a while, right? Like until the aerogel becomes cheaper, but we can't do aerogel right now.
Mm.
Like, and our glass is going to get incrementally better, but we're going to just use the same glass. And what we're doing right now, I think, is again, we're leveraging technologies. So, you know, in all of history, throughout all of history, buildings have been built around the sun, right? Like, where's south sitting from where I'm sitting?
Mm.
Let's find south, east, and west. Where are the windows going to go?
Mm.
You know, what's happening in the north side? And so a lot of the design decisions are already made based on just that one component. And from then on, it's like, well, okay, what are the shading mechanisms? What are the ways to keep, your building as temperature stable as possible? Humidity. It's not just about the materials that go into a building. It's then how we can keep, the temperature in the building more consistent over time, and how can we prevent air leakage and make the building more airtight, but also improve the wellness of the people who are inside of the building. And then, what happens when that building comes down? Is it something that we're going to think about in terms of urban design and zoning? Like, is this building going to be changed into something different 100 years from now, or is it going to be taken down? Well, let's think about that. Are we going to recycle these elements? So again, it comes down to constraints. Like, sorry, my 18-month-old is like knocking on the window here. But what are we after? I think we're after improving all of that from start to finish. Like, we need to understand where our decisions are hurting the outcome or improving it. And of course, like, architects can't be responsible for improving everything. We have to also think about, 50 other issues. But sustainability is a really important one that I think everybody's focused on right now. And it's not like, you go onto people's websites and it's like, well, we care about sustainability. It's like, yeah, everyone has to care about sustainability. Like, that's not something you should boast about. We should all care about sustainability and the environment, because we will all die if we don't very soon. Like, it's very dire. So, and are we going to improve our technology? Yes. I mean, my husband and I, we finished our floors, finish our natural wood floors with some kind of wax finish, and it sucks. There's stains all over our floors. And it's like, no, next time we're going to use the most chemically intense polyurethane finish so that we can protect our floors. And you have to like kind of figure out the trade-offs, right? Like, we're going to keep trying, like, just keep try new technologies, trial and error, and hopefully you're working with clients who are open to those things, right? And that's part of education. And like, you can't blame a client's lack of education on a client. That's our job, is to help them come to the right conclusions and, help them realize that, okay, maybe you spend a little bit more money on the airtightness of your building, but over time, you're going to save money on operating costs, for example.
It's interesting that like that dynamic between the client and the designer. Like, you quite often have to be almost an educator to be able to, educate your clients as to how to do things better. Like, they don't necessarily always have the answers. You have to sometimes provide the answers.
Well, they're not meant to have the answers. That's not their job.
No,
it's our job to have the answers. It's our job to care. It's our job to, think through all of these issues and have these conversations and self-educate and move forward in order to do that. And like, being my own business owner and speaking directly to clients, I'm like, wow, I really need to improve on this. Because when a client calls me and they're anxious or nervous about something, it's usually money right now, but if they're nervous about something, that means I wasn't clear enough. It means I didn't communicate to them what it entails, the process, the schedule, what does an architect do? I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not a contractor. Like, those are different things. And I have to explain that to a client. And if they get angry or upset about not understanding the process, that's my fault directly. So it is about education. It's not about sitting in a room, being masterminds, and then putting something out on the table in front of the client and saying, trust me, I know what I'm doing. No, this is not about that. We are serving the client. We're serving the public. We're serving the people around us. And we have to be good at of it all.
Yeah, definitely is a good way to think about it. And I mean, that has been done before. Like I was watching the documentary about Ray and Charles Ames the other day. Um,
Hmm.
and like how he like basically just most of his clients was just like, you can't even look at it. I'm gonna show you what is done at the end, and like
Yes.
you just have to accept it.
Yeah.
It's just crazy, but like I don't know if you could even do that these days. Maybe you could, but it's not a very good way to. I feel like the dynamic between the client and the designer working together to create the best outcome is part of the reason why we do what we do. It's not necessarily just I'm so good at what I do that I'm just going to do it and you have to deal with it. Like it's not really a good attitude necessarily.
Well, I'll say this. There are star architects, there are star designers, and there are artists and people who have such a strong signature and have such talent
Mm.
that there are clients who are like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're going
Yeah.
to do it, and I need you to be 100% in this
Mm.
work. I don't want to influence you in some way. And
Mm.
there's something to be said about that. It's
Yeah.
art to some degree, right?
Mm.
And I don't claim to be the best designer out there. I think I have a long way to go, and I
Mm.
don't think I'll ever get to starchitect status. And not quite frankly, I'm not after that. I'm, but I think that there's something to be said about really fantastic designers,
Mm.
and let that happen. Let it be. They're rare. They're few and far between.
Mm.
So let's, let Zaha design crazy things that I'm sure clients are like, I don't get it, but it looks cool and it's going to help our city, and we're going to pay for it,
That's good.
and like, but it's like everybody walks by Zaha buildings. I've been to a few, and I'm just like in total awe
Mm.
and amazement, and I don't know if I like it or not, but it like spurs something in you. It's
Mm.
emotional, it's intense, and we need that as
Mm.
people,
Mm.
right? So I don't think everything has to be collaborative. I don't.
Mm. That's good.
I take that
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. No, it's definitely an interesting conversation because like they really push collaboration so much in university, but like the reality is a lot of the really famous designers weren't necessarily as collaborative as what they're teaching at uni. Like yeah,
No, and they had personalities, and
yeah,
those personalities were not going to get broken through by somebody who's like, well, I think you should think about this. Like,
yeah.
I don't think like Safdie is sitting up there going, yeah, I like your perspective. He's like, no, I feel this is it,
And the interesting thing
And
was they were very like full on people, a lot of them. Like they weren't the most like easygoing people. Like the more research I do into like famous designers, like they're really, you know, convicted in their thoughts and just full on about it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we need that too, because the more collaborative we get, the more we start diluting ideas
Yeah.
realistically.
Mm.
Like we start thinking about all the different things, and I've seen this happen. I've seen there be a big idea on the table, and then all of a sudden everybody starts to pick at it. And it's like, well, what about this? And what about that? It's like, okay, well, we can tweak this and we can turn the volume down. And you're turning knobs and down and down
Mm.
and down until the idea is barely there.
Mm.
And then it looks like every other building,
Mm. I feel like
right?
this
It's
comes
like,
into the concept of I mean I said this previously. I don't know if it's a term, but like design pollution. Like basically how like there's Instagram, we've got like Pinterest, Google, all these things. Like it's just polluting our minds. Like back in the day, a designer they had a book, maybe like a few books they found at the bookshop to look at. Like there was no internet, and like you could think more freely and actually come up with innovative ideas. Whereas now we're kind of
yes,
polluted in our minds and we look to the internet for answers that everyone is seeing the same answers. That's the thing. Mm.
I like that. I like the design pollution. I think it's just general pollution. I think we're living in the world of noise,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And the noise is like, I could say that about design. I could say that about my daily life. Like, I need my mind to calm down. Our
Mm.
mind is part of, it's not how we've evolved, but the
Mm.
internet and Instagram and Facebook for all the wonderful things that brains to be able to handle that amount of information
Mm.
in such a short amount of time.
Mm.
Neither have we been able to like, you know, manage our brain's responses to
Mm.
the kind of hormones we release every time we flip through Facebook or whatever. It's like we need to become super aware of what this is all doing to us in order to be mindful, right? And I do agree that, you know, our designs are like, okay, well, when we go and we try to design something, well, what do? We look at precedents, right? So we go and search for other buildings that have been done.
Mm.
And then we kind of take ideas from it, maybe, and we
Mm.
maybe put this idea and maybe that idea. That kind of things get dissolved sometimes and become unclear. And
Mm.
I think that like the value of school is exactly the opposite. It's like, what is your idea? Go 100% in. Like,
Mm.
don't let anything else, but forget gravity. It doesn't exist.
Mm.
Yeah, you know, roughly. Um, real life would be bigger than what you've drawn it to be.
Mm.
But let's make sure your idea is super clear,
Mm.
and let's make sure that you can describe it really well. And I think that's what the value of school and academia is.
Mm.
And that's why I always wanted to have a connection back to academia while I was practicing. And I want to get back into it because I'm afraid of what you're saying. I'm afraid of becoming super aware of all the different things that are going to impact the design, and then making everything simple, solving the problem in the easiest way,
Mm.
right? And then all out of that, you kind of get basic buildings or basic designs. And sometimes, most of the time, it has to be basic, but sometimes there's an opportunity, and I don't want to miss the opportunity.
Mm. Yeah, it's really hard because in some ways you could say that we are the best designers ever because we have so much technology and, you know, resources at our fingertips. But then in the other way, you could say we're the worst designers ever because we have so much pollution that we're just replicating the same stuff over and over. So it's really interesting, like
Yeah.
really interesting thing. And like for me personally, my way of tackling that is just trying to read as much books as I can and like actually learn more about history because I feel like when you look to history, you actually learn more about why those people came up with the ideas they came up with. What were the cultural things that affected them? But if we just look to like random images of toasters on Google, you know what I mean? We're not necessarily going to create anything innovative.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I agree with you that, being able to focus on something is valuable, and it's something that we've lost for sure.
Mm.
And that focus is hard to regain because there's so many ways that you can attack a problem nowadays,
Mm.
not just with a pen and a paper. Like
Yeah.
there's, you know, I remember I was in school and one of my professors was like, "This is ridiculous. I can't stare at your Rhino models that are just like copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, and it's just like a field of the same building but slightly different, right?" And he caught the on that very quickly, and he was telling us, he was like, "This is nuts. The guys are just doing one building, but you're changing little things about it, and it's not a different project. It's the same thing. You're kind of over over perfecting it or something. Like
Mm.
on a piece of paper, you're stuck. You're constrained, and all of a sudden, every stroke you make means so much more.
Mm.
And so, the more information that we're adding, the more information we can play with, and we're diluting through detail, explosion of a big idea, right? And you could say things about how that could be useful, but it's certainly a challenge that we're up against.
Yeah. Yeah, I like some of the most amazing times I have for design inspiration is just walking through nature and just looking at things in nature and just thinking, oh wow, look, that's a chair. That could be this aspect of this design, like things like that. Because the way I see it, like nature is the foundation of design. Like everything we've designed
Yes.
is just built on nature, basically. Like even we've spoken on this podcast
Mhm.
before about how some of the things we design are inherently something that's already in nature, but we haven't even thought about it like that. Like internet, for example, it's so similar to the concept of mycelium and mushrooms, how they communicate under the ground. Um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
even organic design is legit just looks like things that are in nature. Um, and like that idea of how like these things are already there and we're just kind of, repurposing them or like collating them into something else. Like I find that really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right that like to unplug, right, from the like endless, you know, black hole at this point of information that is the internet, you just go for a walk.
Mm,
You know, go look at a building next door, go touch one,
mm,
like, go look at the floor as you're walking through and notice the different shapes and patterns that you're seeing
mm,
around you and the scale of it and feel through it, because architecture is about inhabiting spaces. It's not about just looking at it. And we've created something that's about visualization of architecture. It's valuable. We should think about it. It's important, but we cannot lose the corporeal experience of a building,
mm.
and that's all five senses. I mean, I'm not licking doorknobs, but essentially, you know, like uh, there's aspects of that we're using as we sit in our offices 10 hours a day
Mm,
and, turning a 3D model around.
mm,
Like we're losing it totally. And yes, we can throw a camera in and look at the view, fine, but the the actual kind of like scale and relationships and proportion, your mind starts to lose that
mm.
intuition because you're so heavily reliant on these tools. So we're not training our minds enough. And I only say that because, take photos of them, whatever, in order to really come back to the true craft
Mm,
of architecture. And I'm sure that this is similar for everything, forks. You're designing a fork, like there's a difference between the thing that's in your model and holding it,
mm.
right? And how it feels in your hands and the weight of it and how, you know, you're using it on a daily basis and what is even a fork. So like we need to sort of step back, I think, in order to re-engage with those issues.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, even the skill of just being able to look at something and create something else from what you absorb from that object, like that's a very important skill. I feel like that a lot of people lose because, like, you look at a polished, finished object on Google. You're not necessarily going to be creating anything too different to that. But if you look at a texture on the wall and think that could be a perfect grip on this object, or like for example the other day I was on an airplane and they had like the vents for the aircon, and I was like, oh, that'd be a cool like backing of a chair. Like that kind of way of thinking about
Mm,
the code is like everything is just inspiration. I think that's
hmm.
like something that it's like a muscle. You have to work that. You have to actually be able to
Yes,
perceive things. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And these conversations too,
Mm.
like to kind of look into yourself and reflect on how you've been doing things and challenge that is also really important.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I found even just having the podcast for myself has been really beneficial because I've been able to like
Oh, I bet.
self-rationalize things.
Yep.
Like it's almost like a meditation practice. Like I talk to someone and like it brings out things that I didn't even think about at the time. Yeah.
Yep. Definitely. I was going to say meditation and I was going to say therapy.
Mm. Well, we might leave it there
Um,
anyway because I know you've got something else to do today. But thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, I'm sorry the connection was a bit spotty. Well, once I get my internet connected again, we should meet up again and have another chat because I found this really interesting. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would absolutely love to. And thank you so much for having me. I mean, again, this is like so fun and it's amazing what you're doing. I think it's great and I'm looking forward to more conversations that you have with other people.
Mm.
So definitely let's stay in touch and I'd be happy to do more.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for coming on. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Have a great night. Bye.